You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
Welcome back to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd, and joining me across the table, properly caffeinated and everything on this cold winter morning, we have Her Holiness, the Reverend Tracy. How you doing?
Well, I'm doing okay, Tim. This week has been a little bit better than last week. So I did kind of promise a two-parter of the Reverend's epically shitty week last week. And I think I can talk about it now without necessarily crying too much. But I do have like an unfortunate announcement to make to our fans. And that is our mini mascot, the Reverend's cat Beans, unfortunately passed away last Sunday. I mean, in a weird way, just to kind of go on about it for just a second, it's kind of the way you'd hoped it would go for like an elderly cat like that. Like, first off, she wasn't young. She was 14 years, 3 months, and 11 days, because I'm a nerd and put in dates. And she spent all but 3 of them with me. So, I mean, I got more time with that cat than most people get with their cats. And she still lived longer than a lot of cats tend to do. You know, and it was one of those things where we woke up that Sunday morning, she was declining, like she was acting really, really funky. We wavered on taking her to like the emergency vet 30 minutes away or just waiting until the urgent care opened. And, you know, she was still coming out, right? Like, I love my joke that my cat was stupid because I can at least deflect with humor and say she was even so dumb that she didn't even do the right things. Like, for a cat in crisis, or a cat that was breaking down. Because, you know, normally they hide away. They don't come around people and their pride and stuff. So, you know, we kind of made her comfortable. But even though we didn't take her to the emergency vet, when we got to the urgent care, they pretty much confirmed, like, it wouldn't have made a difference. Yeah. It would have been the same result with possibly costing, like, 2 to 3 times more because of that service over there. So went peacefully, you know, got to be held and all of that. It wasn't like some crazy crying situation. You know, sometimes it goes really horribly. So in a way, it went as ideally as it could for knowing that it was going to happen one day. And, yeah, took her. And of course, like, I'm still kind of like grieving it, right? She was my ESA, which kind of adds a level of it for me because there's the cruel irony that normally when I feel this way, that was her job to take care of. And I don't have her now to do that. So, yeah, we got her ashes back. We went the whole cremation route and getting, like, a paw print and a thing. And I was actually, like, super impressed with what we got back, too. Because I was just kind of expecting, you know, like, my friend got her dog back in, like, not even, like, a Ziploc. It was, like, a twist-tie closed bag and, like, some metal tin with nothing on it. And, like, they never did send, like, the ink paw prints, which is something they do. And meanwhile, I got back, like, this nice little plaster impress, like, it's a foam type thing that's got her paw print. And, like, and it's in this case, and it's got the Rainbow Bridge poem on one side. And, you know, and then I got her ashes back, and I was expecting them, like, you know, maybe in a Ziploc bag in, like, a little box or whatever. And it's like, no, it's actually, like, a screwed, tight, wooden thing. So I was like, oh, okay, well, I mean, that's nice. I mean, it kind of was nice to see her dealt with respect, I guess, is what ultimately came from it.
Yeah, my mother, when she was cremated, they put her in a plastic bag, popped that bag into a cardboard box, and shipped it to us. So
yeah,
there was that.
It is kind of interesting, like, the way it happened to go was that she got, you know, kind of the royal treatment to the end. I mean, this cat was very spoiled. I used to make her food. You know, I made a lot of toys for her, too, and now she's got, like, a little memorial, like, right there in the living room where her bed always was, because, you know, because that's the thing is when you lose a pet, it's the absence, right? Sure. Like, it's when you're not having them around. And the other joke I've made recently to deflect with humor is, like, you know, when you lose a dog, you miss all the things you used to go do with the dog. When you lose a cat, you miss all the things you used to cuss the cat out for doing, like weaving in between your ankles while you go down the stairs, or being under your foot, like, while, you know, you're cooking. Or, like, Beans' favorite thing to do is, you know, she'd start off all cuddly and sweet in the morning and quickly progress to just walking all over my face because she wanted food. So So I'm coping. I'm dealing with that. It's a very sad and gutting loss to lose any fur companion. I do feel like there's a little bit of a difference, and possibly this is just because of my biased perspective on it. And it's also understandable when it is an ESA. I mean, granted, I'd already kind of more or less moved on to the sense where I felt like, do I still need an ESA like that right now? No, I mean, I might get a dog companion at some point to go hiking with. But, you know, she was just such a great helper for a long time. She helped with a lot of my anxiety problems, a lot of my depression, a lot of my sleep issues. So, and I did have my first dream where I felt like she visited me. And it was very odd because it was very lucid. Like, it kind of felt like I could feel her and stuff like that. So, one of those things. But it's an interesting grieving process to say goodbye to something that's been in your life more than most people.
Yeah. I mean, I was sort of in the same boat with Phil. I mean, I didn't have him for nearly as long as you had Beans or anything like that, but, you know, he meant the world to me.
Yeah.
As far as Beans, she was one hell of a cat, I'll tell you that. I mean, like, she and I didn't get too close, but, you know, we had a bond, in our own way. I mean, it was kind of like you're all right.
Yeah, and I mean, even the Mr. Reverend, he admittedly was not a cat person. And Beans had that ability to win over the non-cat people, right? Like, and he actually got pretty emotional. He had, first of all, when they came in and told us how bad it was, he has never seen me break down like that. So he was honestly really shocked seeing me like that, because normally I'm really good at jumping to like intellectualizing and staying calm and getting through a situation. All went out the fucking window, and it was my cat. Because, you know, he's seen me go through stuff. Like, he was around when my stepfather passed away, and I was relatively close-ish to him, like, considering that he didn't come into my life until I was, like, older in high school. But, you know, he's seen me go through some stuff, and he's just never seen me in that state. And then it was funny because we realized after it had happened, we were both avoiding coming home. And there's even points where he's just like, damn it, Beans, like this last week, where he'll be like, well, you know, I could put the mint gum in the trash because, you know, she's not going to get it. Because that was her whole thing, is like, she loved mint. So
you can use bleach again.
Oh, yeah, I could use bleach. That was actually one of the first deflections with humor I caught myself doing, because, you know, different people mourn differently. And I had a real compulsion to clean up, like, her litter box and her food places. Like, I didn't see the need to keep those around, and also, like, it can attract pests, so I guess there's that little bit of intellectualizing and logic that was going on. And so the Mr. Reverend helped pick everything up, and I'm spraying the bleach solution that I've started making since the pandemic, because, yeah, she really loved bleach. I switched to cleaning with vinegar. People used to make fun of how it smelled like vinegar, and I'm like, well, my cat's dumb, and will literally lick cleaner off the floor. That's why I have a steam mop. And so, like, I take the bleach, I'm spraying it, and, like, tears start coming down my eyes. And I look at the Mr. Reverend and I go, Beans would have loved this. You know? So there's still, like, a lot of good, happy memories going on. I actually plan on, because I'm a bit of a photographer, so I, of course, have hundreds of pictures of this cat. And including some that the Mr. Reverend will send to me when I'm ready. He did take some of me holding her, you know, before we said goodbye. And so it's kind of funny because the first picture I have of her, she was like this little bitty baby kitten, like, in my shirt, because she was an orphan cat. So heartbeat and warmth is important when they're that young and they're separated from the mother cat. And so I've got that as the first. I've got, you know, the last ones. But I have hundreds of in between. So I'm actually going to get like a little a digital photo frame and put it over by, like, her ashes and her paw print and stuff, and just keep that memorial for her. She was in my life long enough, I think it warrants being remembered for a while. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've made it no secret how I feel about animals on here. I mean, they're not humans, but they are also living creatures that do have positive impacts on your life and should be grieved and celebrated as such.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad I already got my tattoos, because I'd gotten my paws, like years ago, because I've got 2 on my hands and 2 on my chest, because when she was a kitten, she slept on my hands. And then as I got older, and that was actually her thing that she would do whenever I would have, like, high stress moments, was sit on my chest and purr. So that's why those are placed where they're at. And it's like the first question some of my friends was like, are you getting a tattoo? I was like, well, I mean, I already kind of have them. I mean, I might get the one over, you know, my quote unquote heart. Because, right, the heart's not really that far over where we put our hand to represent where the heart is. Yeah. But I do have a paw print over there that I might get, like, softly grayed out like just for the one to be different. But I don't know, because I'm weirdly like persnickety. So I don't know if I could handle one being faded and not the other. So it's like, I love the representation of it, but I just don't know if I could do it. Because like I'd need to get both done, you know what I mean? But either way, I've got time to think about that, because with the baby Reverend going on right now, you don't get tattoos during your pregnancy. I think everybody knows that. If you didn't, today you learned.
That's not good multitasking.
No. They don't want to really like intentionally spike your endorphins and other chemicals going on in your body, like you're trying to gestate a child. So
yeah, I can imagine. But anyway, I actually, speaking of pets, I received some words about Phil this week that kind of shocked me. Professor Aubrey reached out and told me that the vet that we took Phil to for his last day on Earth, I totally forgot that I had ordered like the paw prints myself and like a clipping of his hair, and it's been like over almost a year and a half.
Yeah.
Since it happened, but they finally got in contact, and they sent it to my old place in Portland, Oregon, where the professor is, and she's ultimately going to send that to me. But it's interesting having that, because when he was gone, it was sad, and I didn't really, apart from some toys, and I wasn't going to keep toys around for a super long time.
Sorry, I'm laughing because right now she's got all of her favorite toys are like stacked in that bed, like around her ashes. I don't know if I can get rid of them. but like 6 years from now, may have a different opinion at that point. And me, I'm so. I'm literally the type that can move across country with just 2 suitcases with all my shit. I did that. The Mr. Reverend and I essentially did that. Granted, we loaded down a car because it was 2 of us, and we have kitchen gadgets that we had that we knew would be more expensive to replace than just like driving the car.
Yeah.
But I've done that 2 or 3 times where I've just moved with suitcases. Like when I moved from Texas to Arizona, suitcase. When I moved from Arizona to Portland, Oregon, suitcase. So
there you go,
definitely relate. There's something oddly purging about that too, by the way, with that style of move.
It is in a lot of ways, because like I think the big problem I see with some people is that they get totally sentimental about everything that they own, when you do have to have the mindset that nothing that you own is going to be permanent. Like this computer here could easily just die like right now, and it's a great computer for what it does, but when it dies, it's not going to have a use. So I shouldn't have such a love of a particular object that I can't let it go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's actually like a very it's a Buddhist poem / saying / story by Ajahn Chah, and it's called like "The Cup is Already Broken." And it's kind of this mentality held and appreciated in Buddhism, especially when it comes to material things, is like, it doesn't matter how wonderful the cup is when you get it, eventually it's going to break, and therefore you should try to manage your expectation and your attachment around those things.
Wasn't that in one of the Practical Stoicism episodes?
Yes, actually, I think the very first episode of Practical Stoicism. So if you're interested in hearing like kind of a different version of that, because I think it's funny, he does talk about Buddhism a little bit and how it's a little bit more praised then necessarily Stoicism gets a very bad rap, even though it's got a lot of really valuable type mentality to it. But yeah, I don't remember if he actually mentioned verbatim the cup is broken story.
It sounds really familiar.
Right,
I think
he did something very aligned to it.
Yeah.
But I don't remember, because I remember when he went into it, I thought about the cup being broken, but that's because of studying like Buddhism for a little while, and they talk about some of these concepts like in my favorite book on Buddhism, which is Buddhism for Dudes, which was written by a Marine. So of course, succinct, totally spoke my language. It's everything I wanted Buddhism without beliefs to be about.
And it's 12 pages.
Yeah, it's it's not 12 pages, but it's a bathroom reader. Like, we totally used to keep it like in the bathroom at our old place, because we had like a guest bathroom, like a second toilet that was like downstairs when we lived in Oregon, and we totally kept it there for anybody who visited and needed a bathroom read. But it's a really good book if you're interested in any of that, both that book and Modern Stoicism. Really great podcast. And they're very short, by the way. Those episodes for Stoicism are like 7 to 10 minutes, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just meant to be, he's going through certain books and learning things himself. So got a little bit on a detraction there, but, not saying you should necessarily think of people like a cup that's going to be broken eventually. But, the things of it, like the cat toys and stuff. Like, maybe I will let some of those go. But I think for me, it's because the kids gave them to her. Like, when we moved, they went and bought her this little sushi set. And then that's even funny, too, because the Mr. Reverend and I went out to get sushi when we got her ashes back on Thursday last week. Because when the pandemic hit, it was probably the first time we ever had sushi brought to our house. And we learned that Beans really loved salmon sashimi. So it kind of became a thing of, like, every now and then we just bring, like, a little piece of sashimi or something back for her. So, like, sushi became, like, our cat's favorite meal.
Eating like a queen.
I told you, she was spoiled. She worked hard, and she got paid back with a lot of love and a lot of good food. I mean, granted, she went to junk food as she got older, but, that's how that happens sometimes. She wanted it. She didn't want the made-from-home food anymore, and I, just listened. I was like, you know what, that's fine. You're old enough. I figure I can give you some canned food if that's what you really want. Ugh.
Well, anyway, that's the news I heard about Phil. As far as Tim's Tremendous Tapes, by the time you hear this, episode 3 will be out. Mostly featuring tracks from albums released in 1986, apart from one track kind of celebrating the life of David Crosby, who recently passed away. I don't know if you're familiar with who he is, but famous rock star in the 60s, was in a band called the Byrds, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. We talked about him when Neil Young pulled their music from Spotify, but was able to play some of his music on Tim's Tremendous Tapes. Hope you give it a listen. Go to the Linktree link in our show description, and you'll be able to find out where on Spotify you can find Tim's Tremendous Tapes. But we're here. It is part 3 of our gun control talk, and within the past week, it's been pretty wild in California.
Oh, yeah. 2 major news shooting events. And Tim and I were talking about a little bit of it at the start of the show. And I don't know much about the mass shooting situation at the Lunar New Year, but listening to Up First, I believe I've mentioned I'm a pretty big fan of that one. 15 minutes of the wave tops of the, news of the day. And they had gone in a little bit more on the Half Moon Bay shooting that happened. And I thought there were parts of that story that are interesting to share, mostly because it's very relevant to a lot of the points we've already discussed.
Indeed. What are some of those points?
Yeah, I mean, for those that don't really know what happened, other than a shooting that happened at a mushroom farm, it was a disgruntled worker. He shot 8 people at 2 locations. And I think, if I'm remembering the numbers correctly, it was 5 at one location and 3 at a second location. And he was inevitably found in front of the sheriff's office. I guess he was in his vehicle with the gun next to him. And he was texting his wife, like he had had something typed out, like, "See you in the next life." So at first I thought it sounded like he had turned himself in. It sounds like he was just making it convenient to find him. And I guess what's interesting about this was hearing some of the sound bites on Up First, where I want to say it's probably this Newsom guy, but I don't want to say that because I don't quite remember. I just know they played some clips of him talking and more or less just explaining, like, part of the problem is he feels like we have way too many guns in this country. So it goes into some of the stuff where we had talked about in the prior episodes of not necessarily supporting a ban, but supporting some of the common sense gun reform that would really at least lead to less gun ownership in this country. Like, not being as easy to get for everybody. Another point that was interesting is this shooting happened to involve a high-capacity magazine. However, I'm not sure how much that would have affected things because as the investigation has gone on, the 8 people were intentional targets. These were people he had a problem with. This was not, he just went and sprayed across the floor and got who he got. Right? So, I'm not... So while I understand that the point of him bringing it up is that in California they already banned these high-capacity magazines, But he did bring up the fact that, you've got gun show loopholes in the state right next door and an ability to go right over to Nevada and places like that and get these things. Granted, a regular capacity, magazine would have held 10 to 17. So depending on what kind of gun it was, what kind of magazine he got for said gun, because sometimes you can get multiple sizes depending on what you buy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much that would have made a difference for this instance. Please don't hear that I don't support banning high-capacity magazines. I just found it was interesting that they brought it up for this one, even though I'm not sure it would have made much of a difference for this one, especially because he did go to a second location.
Yeah.
So if you consider he only went after 5 people at the first location, so even if it was a smaller capacity magazine, that would have given him 2 shots per person before he would have had to have changed out. Which again, doesn't make it impossible to do that.
Well, to your point, though, I think the reason the reason to point this out is that if you are catching it as someone who supports common sense gun reform, someone who is full Team Red, Second Amendment, everybody should get all the weapons they want, is going to latch onto that too.
It's not important, exactly.
And use it to kind of discredit. You know, like, why are you talking about this when it has nothing? Because, like, the bump stock thing, you have a lot of gun owners, like you laughed at me with the bump stock thing, Because
it's like, you could just basically make one. Like, so basically, I felt like the bump stock thing was more about being able to add an additional charge if somebody used it to effectively make. I did not think it was funny, or not funny, sorry, interesting. I should use words a little intentionally with this topic.
It's hilarious.
It was interesting that the person referred to it as a assault pistol, which I feel like in the last few episodes we've kind of learned this putting assault in front of something is a little bit of the far blue side of trying to, like, kind of label a gun something that it may or may not actually be. Because really anything is an assault thing if you're using it for assault. Right? Like, it's like a kitchen knife.
An assault pepper jar.
Well, I mean, a kitchen knife isn't really considered an assault weapon unless it's used for an assault, in which case they're going to call it the assault weapon. In a case, they will do that. But the other really interesting point about this is one of the things that we covered in the past was not necessarily a pattern of mental unwellness, which, I've had my little spiel about where I would still think that this constitutes as mental unwellness, but more of a history of violence. And apparently this man, when he got let go from a restaurant, he threatened his roommate at the time. I guess they both worked at the same restaurant together. Something I didn't dig in too far was I'm assuming that restaurant worker still had his job. I was unclear as to whether or not he had any factor in determining him losing his own job at the restaurant, but he did threaten to kill him, did threaten to hurt other people, and he eventually got kicked out in a restraining order for putting a pillow over this roommate's face. So that goes into the history of aggression here. And he got a restraining order, but obviously a restraining order isn't enough when that person hasn't dealt with the anger issues that justified enacting violence against somebody. So, I mean, I'm not saying that every single instance of something like that is going to result in this down the road. However, I do think that it was a sign that he had some aggression issues that should have been addressed, not just you stay away from this person.
And I mean, there's a lot to untangle here because, I mean, we are talking about something that happened in 2013. And, as we discussed before recording, it is possible for people over a 10-year period to change and become a different person. But if they do have that initial history of violence, I don't think it is out of the question to still say something along the lines of prove it. Yeah. If you want to get your hands on a gun, even 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years later.
Because he actually, that was a guilty thing. He did that. He held a pillow over somebody's face. Threats of violence are one thing. Because we do kind of have very aggressive ways of speaking to each other. Like, oh, I'll kill you doesn't actually necessarily mean I'll kill you, right? Like, we can be fair and talk about how we speak in America land. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is he did cross that line once. And it doesn't sound like anything was ever required of it. I mean, we don't know, right? This was 10 years ago. An article is only going to include what the article feels like including. But it's unclear because they don't seem to always mandate that kind of thing.
And if they do, you also have to have a person that, like a person going into rehab that has to be open to change, because if they feel they were justified, they may be able to tell themselves, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but I still have a right to be angry. No.
Maybe there's some good use in therapy is all I'm saying, I guess.
Yeah. And we'll definitely keep an eye out on these particular topics here. We wanted to go through the remaining pros and cons here of this wonderful article from the procon.org website, and then leave it up to you folks to let us know your thoughts on gun control, whether that be sending us a voice message, answering the questions directly on Spotify, or finding us on social media, like on our Facebook group and everything.
Yep. We totally invite you guys to give us your thoughts on any of these points.
And any other episodes as well. We're rather lonely. We want to hear from you.
Yeah. We like content. We like interaction. We need people.
Yes, more people. and this will be the year we're going to be getting stickers. We're going to get business cards. We're going to be meeting more people. How about that?
Yes, we're going to try to anyway. Bring in more folks.
Indeed. But let's start here with pro number 11. I'll dive into here. And that's the presence of a gun makes a conflict more likely to become violent. The FBI found that in 2013, arguments such as romantic triangles, brawls fueled by alcohol or drugs, and arguments over money resulted in 1,962 gun deaths, 59.9% of the total. A June 1985 study published in the American Journal of Public Health found that the weapons used in altercations were those closest at hand. An editorial published in the June 1985 American Journal of Public Health noted gun-inflicted deaths often ensue from impromptu arguments and fights. In the U.S., 2/3 of the 7,900 deaths in 1981 involving arguments and brawls were caused by guns. A 1993 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine found that rather than confer protection, guns kept in the home are associated with an increase in the risk of homicide by a family member or intimate acquaintance. And I think this, does speak to the fact that, not all murders are planned out months in advance. The high 90%, if not higher, of them, it's as mentioned in that paragraph here, it's spur of the moment, it's passion, a crime of passion. They get so angry that, yes, they reach for the quickest thing available. And in a way, I kind of agree with this, that, having it there could lead to worse results, but again, if we have common sense gun reform in practice, if we're talking, psychological evaluations, proper licensing, all that stuff, proper gun safes, I think that could, bring this down. I think, it is a risk of having a gun that someone could lose their mind over something simple. Yeah. It could be a guy coming home from work and finding his wife cheating on him.
It's also very easy, like, once you pull that trigger, right? That tends to be a little bit literally more life or death than, say, if there's a baseball bat near you, right? It's just a little bit easier to inflict more harm when that is the thing you have the easiest access to. And when you are enraged, there are parts of the brain, namely parts of the prefrontal cortex, that start to get a little bit mucky, like in certain situations. And rage is one of them, where you're not thinking about the fact that you might kill this person. You're angry, and you're going to take it out the way that is the handiest to take it out. It's a little bit of how that animal brain reacts. Yeah. So anything that you can do to put a barrier between that animal brain, like, and your logic brain, like giving it a chance for the logic to kick in at least, like, is actually going to be in your favor of not doing more harm than you really would intend or want to do as a normal, level-headed, chemically human. Because the fact of the matter is, when you get to that state, there are chemicals firing off all in your body that you're fighting.
This kind of reminds me of, and I know we've talked about on the show before, of like towns that legalize harder drugs. Like I think it was in Portland, Oregon, when they allowed usage of like a certain amount of like mushrooms and high end type of drugs, and the critics said that could lead to increased overdoses, and yeah, it could. Denying that would be silly for somebody who does support, adults making whatever choices, best choices for their own bodies that they can make. The argument isn't at that point drugs should be banned then, just like in this case, it shouldn't be guns should be banned. It should be, yes, to your point, what can we do to make sure that this number doesn't get higher? Because again, you can have a person who's owned a gun for 20, 30, 40 years. To your point, one bad thing, a misfire in the brain, chemicals flying everywhere, makes a very bad choice.
Oh, yeah. It's like if you've ever made a rash decision, compare it to sending that text to somebody that really, in your normal level-headed brain, you shouldn't have sent. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's a very lower stakes version of this. But I think we've all done that, where we've said or done the thing and gone, fuck, why? Why did I do that? But at the time, it felt very justified. It felt like the right thing to do. So it's that on steroids, right? I mean, it's just how our brains work.
I think we've both done that to each other before.
Oh, yeah. There's that one that I told. I've talked more than one about, like, it was a long paragraph, and I'd actually included a link to a bit in Rick and Morty about like a get your shit together thing, which is still one of my favorite quotes.
Yeah.
And by the way, side note, I know this is totally nothing to do with what we're talking about, but the news of Justin Roiland, like we're probably going to have to bring that up.
He got fired.
No, I know he did.
Yeah.
That's where I was like, whoa, like they're replacing him, because I have feelings on that. So we might have to teaser for next episode. That might need to come up at the beginning of our next episode, because he's... Okay, nope. See, I don't want to go into a digression on it because I want to stay on this topic because I think it's going to take. So Justin Roiland, next episode, we'll get into that a little bit. But yeah, the get your shit together thing, I thought it was, appropriate at the time to send this long novel and send off. And by the way, I'd even done it with the kid's mother at one point, where things got really tense and I kind of got tired of feeling like how I was being treated. Right? I can't even say that was that person's intention to make me feel unimportant. But boy, did I send an email off once that in hindsight, I was like, I shouldn't have succumbed to that. But it felt so good at the moment. Yeah. And I even have told her that. Like, I made a joke about it when we wound up talking once. Like, I know there's an email I wish I wouldn't have sent. Well, the funny thing too about that text you sent me was when it sent, it broke it up. You wrote it all as one thing, but it broke it up like each sentence, and then just kind of sent it in like different orders. I had to basically take this text message and move it around like a puzzle to find out what a piece of shit person I was. And yeah, it's like, because see, we can laugh about it now, but see, this is the point, right? Is like we don't make the best decisions when we're really emotionally charged.
Yes.
You don't. So if you can train yourself to recognize your animal brain, and maybe your animal brain needs to be crated for a minute, that's the best favor you can do for yourself. And sometimes it's just not having access to the thing.
Yep.
I can't tell you how many times, I wish I could say I'm perfect, but there have been times that I've been successful at like, nope, put the phone down. Put it the fuck down. Because if you let yourself with that phone right now, you're going to justify going over. You're going to text this person this nasty but well-crafted thing you have going in your brain. And it's going to feel really good for like maybe a day at most. And then especially if they do respond to it at all. Like I know I've had temptation with my biological father recently.
I've had that recently with someone too, and I told you about that.
And I've just caught myself like, I'm going to put my phone down. Like I'm not even going to play a game on it. I'm not going to do anything on my phone, because that to me would be, I guess, the much watered down equivalent of getting the gun out of the safe. Or even just having it out, right? So I have literally gone and put my phone away from me recently just to be like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I don't feel like picking a fight with somebody, and that's really all it's going to do. Mm-hmm. So con number 11. Gun control laws would prevent citizens from protecting themselves from foreign invaders. The Libertarian Party stated, quote, "A responsible, well-armed, and trained citizenry is the best protection against domestic crime and the threat of foreign invasion." Counsel for the NRA stated, quote, "It is evident that the framers of the Constitution did not intend to limit the right to keep and bear arms in a formal military body or organized militia, but intended to provide for an unorganized armed citizenry prepared to assist in the common defense against a foreign invader or a domestic tyrant." Marco Rubio, yeah, I'm a big fan of him, let me tell you, U.S. Senator, speaking about gun control laws during his 2016 presidential campaign, stated, quote, "If God forbid ISIS visits our life, our neighborhood, our school, any part of us, the last thing standing, the last line of defense could very well be our ability to protect ourselves."
Because that's going to happen, yeah.
Oh, some things just make you go, wow. So this even goes back to, we talked about the Constitution was written in a different time, and we do amend things based on current reality. Back when the Constitution was written, it's not like it was as simple to get people into, say, the military or arm them, right? Like, the military now, because of, like, the whole military complex thing, like, it's not like they're short on guns and are going to need to ask people, like, you don't sign up to go into the army and the deal is BYOG. You know, you don't bring your own weapons. They typically give them to you if that's the case. And I don't even know how that would honestly play out. But now, formal militias, that is something that I honestly would support. This is also talking about an education that we don't seem to actually have, like, a requirement for with gun ownership in a lot of ways. So this con's kind of just, it makes me laugh a little bit.
And think about it, too. Think about it like this, the stupidity of it. You know, it's like, for the sake of argument, let's say ISIS did invade New York. Do you think the federal government is going to be like, well, we got these laws in the books. We can't tell the people to arm themselves. What are we going to do?
Right.
No, they would. The laws would instantly be changed. And two, I also counter that if we did have foreign invaders coming into our country, I think a lot of people, both on the left and the right-hand side of political thinking, would gladly take up arms to defend.
Right.
You know, because this is not a situation to where only one political party truly loves America. Fuck that noise, you know? But also, too, to Marco Rubio, like, the likelihood of that occurring and even being successful on ISIS's part is so astronomically thin. Why bring this up other than as a ridiculous scare tactic? Ooh, the scary brown people from overseas are going to come and get you, so you got to keep your guns.
I was actually kind of surprised in 2016 he was bringing up ISIS like that strongly, like still.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, while the con isn't completely without point, it feels a bit hyperbolic to me.
Just a
and
little,
like it makes it sound like our military would have no way to arm, get forces here like in time to respond, because I'm just not sure how well a bunch of untrained non-militia people who are armed are going to effectively be able to come together and handle something like this. To me, this is more of an argument of maybe every major city should have a militia that is well trained and regulated and etc. There are actually things you have to do to be considered an official militia.
I mean, isn't that technically what the National Guard is supposed to be anyway? Kind of like a smaller...
but there's like the whole citizen level of it. Like that one's still kind of the government ran one. And I believe the militia would be more of like the citizen ran version of that. This is me saying it very questionably because I'm not going to pretend like I've well researched militias. But it is a concept that I have supported in the past. But they need to be actually ran as a technical militia, which would encourage training, much like how our military does. It would encourage education that more than one con has brought up would be a possible resolution to help some of this, which I feel is lacking in our general gun laws at current. So this is where it's like, yeah, sure, you want to get militias in every major city where it makes sense to, in case something like this happens, so they can be well informed, educated, they'd have a plan, right? They would have their own drills too. So that makes more sense to me than arm everybody, because in my opinion, I don't know how well that would come together as a unified front to actually stop anything. If anything, it's more likely to, I think, get more citizens shot and killed by the group who has been training together for God knows how long to make whatever this imaginary assault that Rubio has come up with in his mind. Like, I don't think that's actually a fair thing to put your citizens up against.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it goes to me, I would be more supportive of a militia situation for what he's talking about, not necessarily using this as an arm everybody.
And again, though, it's like, are there really enough serious threats that a militia is needed? Because when I think of a militia, you know, I mean, I come from Michigan, and the Michigan militia is based out of there. And then you got your, like, Proud Boy groups or your Oath Keeper groups. And you know, they tend to be inhabited by a bunch of knuckle-dragging folks who think that, you know, their idea of how a government should be ran is the only way.
Right.
And that, you know, it's you know, so that's why I guess I'm a little iffy on the idea of a militia, because it seems like a lot of these militias are the ones that are kind of behind some of the brute force stuff you hear about from January 6th.
Yeah. Sorry, I was like just kind of looking. I was like, what is like a citizen-ran militia? But can you legally start a militia? Is the Constitution allow for militias? So there's all sorts of information out there if you want to educate yourself more on what that could look like. But yeah. I don't know. It sounds like you and I differ on that opinion, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But
well, also it's not that I disagree with you. It's just that you know, I just think that the idea that we have any sort of realistic chance of being invaded to the point where we would need these militias is to your point, extremely on the hyperbolic side. Right.
Like, I guess to your point, the Proud Boys haven't exactly stood up against a terrorist attack.
They caused one.
Oh, yeah. If there's anybody on that side, they're going to be pissed that you said that, but that's okay. I honestly don't think we have, like, a lot of folks of that demographic that probably listen to our show. We're really far either side that listen to our show, because we kind of like to bring it back to this middle stance instead of demonizing the opposite side. So, but it's funny, because this, what we just talked about, kind of leads into pro number 12 really well.
Indeed. Good segue there. Pro 12, armed civilians are unlikely to stop crimes and are more likely to make dangerous situations, including mass shootings, more deadly. None of the 62 mass shootings between 1982 and 2012 was stopped by an armed civilian. Gun rights activists state that a 2002 mass shooting at the Appalachian School of Law in Virginia was stopped by armed students, but those students were current and former law enforcement officers, and the killer was out of bullets when subdued. Other mass shootings, often held up as examples of armed citizens being able to stop mass shootings, involved law enforcement or military personnel, and or the shooter had stopped shooting before being subdued, such as a 1997 high school shooting in Pearl, Missouri, a 1998 middle school dance shooting in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, a 2007 church shooting in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and a 2008 bar shooting in Winnemucca, Nevada. Jerry Vocala, assistant professor of writing at Kutztown University, notes, the average gun owner, no matter how responsible, is not trained in law enforcement or on how to handle life-threatening situations. So in most cases, if a threat occurs, increasing the number of guns only creates a more volatile and dangerous situation. And I think of The Godfather. I think of that scene where Don Vito Corleone is gunned down and his son Fredo jumps out of the car, tries to pull his gun out of his coat to, you know, shoot at the people that shot his father down, but then fumbles it and then the gun falls to the ground. I think most people would do that, or to your point, it would be like some bizarre Looney Tunes thing where everybody's shooting themselves, you know? And yeah, I mean, as the numbers indicated in the paragraph here, there was not a good person with a gun stopping a bad person with a gun. It was the bad person running out of bullets, or someone trained in how to deal with a situation like this actively stopping the person, you know. And it's not going to be like, yeah, I'm not ever going to find myself in a situation to where I'm taking down a mass shooter, because I don't have the training for that.
Which is kind of more or less what I just alluded to, because I didn't read ahead on this one, guys. But it's just kind of funny that I was just saying, like, I just don't see your average citizens with the lack of training to do so to be able to come together and effectively stand against a group who has been training together.
Because most people in a threat of extreme violence like that, their first reaction is going to be run. It's not going to be stopping the guy. It's not going to be, I need to be a hero. It's going to be save your ass. Mm-hmm.
So our next one, which is, I'll get into why this is funny after I read it. Con number 12. Strict gun control laws do not work in Mexico and will not work in the United States. Mexico has some of the strictest gun control laws in the world, and yet in 2012, Mexico had 11,309 gun murders, 9.97 gun homicides per 100,000 people, compared to the United States that had 9,146 gun homicides, which is 2.97 per 100,000 people. The country has only one legal gun store, the Directorate of Arms and Munition Sales, compared to at least 63,709 legal gun stores and pawn shops in the United States as of February 10th, 2014. Mexico's gun store is on a secure military base, and customers must present a valid ID, go through a metal detector, and turn over cell phones and cameras to guards. To actually buy a gun, customers have to show proof of honest income, provide references, pass a criminal background check, and provide any military duties prove any military duties were completed with honor, and be fingerprinted and photographed. If allowed to purchase a gun, the customer may buy only one gun, choosing from only a .38 caliber pistol or lower, and one box of bullets. Between 2006 and 2010, Mexico's one gun shop sold 6,490 guns, yet as of 2012, Mexicans owned at least 15 million guns, or about 13.5 guns per 100 people. So this brings me to an article I was able to pull up really quick. Where do you think they get those guns, Tim? Could it be from a neighboring country who has more lax gun laws? Because you would actually be correct. Now, granted, it's a little bit more complicated than that because some of this does go into gun trafficking.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to include this up in the notes so you guys can read it. But there's actually a Harvard Gazette article called Stopping Toxic Flow of Guns from U.S. to Mexico. And so really this con amuses me because it kind of brings up something we've already talked about, and that, look at California. The only reason he probably had a high-capacity magazine was because of the ability to go over to Nevada and get it. Like, it gives that thing that we're accidentally making it worse for Mexico's gun crimes because we are that neighboring quote-unquote state that they are having this flow from. So actually, I can turn this con into a pro that if we strict up what we do, it might actually reduce the gun deaths in Mexico.
And think of their government compared to ours. Now, like, every government's going to have corruption. I'm not ignorant of that fact, but, it is well known that the Mexican government is not the strongest because, you do have, like, your cartel leaders that, live in that country and, in some areas of the country run it, So it's interesting that the hardcore Second Amendment folks will suddenly love Mexico when a stat like this occurs, so it's
Yeah, actually, really quick from this article, I'll go through this snippet. Mexican officials have said that a significant part of the epidemic of violence and crime that has plagued their nation in recent decades is driven by the illicit traffic of weapons from Mexico. Or from the U.S. Mexico has restrictive firearm laws with one gun store. I'm not going to repeat that little bit, but I guess they only issue about 50 permits per year. Between 70 to 90% of guns recovered at crime scenes in Mexico can be tracked back to the U.S. drug cartels, in particular, buy those weapons in the United States, mostly in Texas or Arizona, and smuggle them across the border. So they're going to states. Arizona is very well known for having gun show loopholes. Like, they're not necessarily obtaining the guns illegally in the United States. They're seeming to get them legally here and then traffic them illegally to the United States, very similarly to what you're technically doing when you hop a border to get a gun that you can't get in your own state. That's still kind of going about it illegally. But this is just a bigger version of something that we had kind of already talked about. So I thought that was kind of funny. Again, not funny, interesting. Need to use my words better.
Yeah, for this topic.
So for that con, I'm just going to say that throws that right out the window there. Because we're the ones supplying them with the fucking guns. Like, yeah, their laws would probably be more effective if it wasn't so easy to get them here. I'm not going to say that it's easy necessarily to get them over there. I'm not going to pretend to understand that process. But it can't be that fucking hard if it's 70 to 90% of the guns they're finding being involved coming from the United States.
And that is not even taking into account the numerous years that the CIA has helped, to destabilize that part of the world by supplying arms to, like rebel groups that, support their business causes against governments that don't. So using Mexico as an example is just like people that use Chicago as an example of, gun control laws don't work. It's not taking into account everything, such as Indiana being so damn close.
Right, exactly. Or like I just said, California, with Nevada and Arizona being a drivable distance. It's not really that hard to get the thing that you want because we don't have the federal consistency on this.
Yes. All right, that kind of segues us into probe number 13 here. Countries with restrictive gun control laws have lower gun homicide and suicide rates than the United States. Both Switzerland and Finland require gun owners to acquire licenses and pass background checks that include mental and criminal records, among other restrictions and requirements. In 2007, Switzerland ranked number 3 in international gun ownership rates with 45.7 guns per 100 people, about 3.4 million guns total. In 2009, Switzerland had 24 gun homicides, 0.31 deaths per 100,000 people, and 253 gun suicides, 3.29 deaths per 100,000 people. Finland ranked 4th in international gun ownership rates with 45.3 guns per 100 people, about 2.4 million guns total. In 2007, Finland had 23.43 deaths per 100,000 people, gun homicides, and 172 gun suicides, 4.19 deaths per 100,000 people. The United States, categorized as having permissive firearm regulation by gunpolicy.org, ranked first in international gun ownership rates with 88.8 guns per 100 people, about 270 million guns total. In 2007, the United States had 12,632 gun homicides, 4.19 deaths per 100,000 people, and 17,352 gun suicides, 5.76 deaths per 100,000 people. Harvard professor David Hemingway, PhD, wrote, "We analyzed the relationship between homicide and gun availability using data from 26 developed countries from the early 1990s. We found that across developed countries where guns are more available, there are more homicides. According to a March 2016 study, gun homicide rates in the United States were 25.3 times higher, and gun suicides were 8 times higher in 2010 than in other populous high-income countries. Additionally, 90% of women, 91% of 0 to 14-year-olds, a 0-year-old with a gun, 92% of 15 to 24-year-olds, and 82% of all people killed by firearms were from the United States. And I think the key differentiator here between us and Switzerland and Finland is that they talked about, doing the background checks and the mental health check as well. Which even in states that do have pretty decent gun control laws don't necessarily require all of that stuff.
Right. And I'd also be curious because to me it drives home that fact that, my opinion that I brought up when I was covering, we don't necessarily want to blame mental illness because of the stigma, is I wonder how they treat aggressiveness in those countries, right? Because to me, just bringing up the fact that they do a mental health check doesn't give me the full picture. When I kind of feel like, again, that guy who's tried to smother his roommate over a job he lost, I would think that should constitute some kind of a mark or therapy required for possibly an aggressive personality issue. And these things exist
the
DSM.
And I think one thing you'd want to keep out for, too, is, having therapists that kind of act like doctors in states with medicinal marijuana. The ones who will sign off on anything you ultimately want. Oh, yeah, you got that little tick on your eye. You got cancer.
Oh, God. Arizona was hilarious when it came to that. I didn't even get it for personal use. I got it because somebody, whenever they were first passing the medical marijuana laws, you could buy somebody's grow rights off of them, and then it would be implied that you're providing for them. So a friend of a friend needed more licenses because he was trying to increase his crop to supply for the people that he was trying to supply for. Because unfortunately, whenever it was really new, there was kind of weird math to try to figure out what you could have per patient you cared for. Mm-hmm. So he needed an extra one. He's like, I'll pay for your card so you won't even see. I just need your time. I need you to go to this doctor because, you know, they knew I had like a neck injury that would totally like pass the whatever. And the doctor I went to was Dr. Reefer Alz. Reefer and then ALZ. Mm-hmm. And on his business card, it had a smoking joint. And yeah, so I mean, not even a level of professionalism. Like, this was where I was like, this is a joke. This is just so people can do weed, right? Yeah. Do the weed. I had some strong... I used to be like kind of pro-drug war on drugs. Like, I was a big dare kid, you know what I mean? But I was born and raised in Texas. That was a lot of the narrative I was raised under. Oh, yeah. And I was like, this is just an excuse for potheads to get pot. Like, that's how I used to view that thing. I've now learned some things, met some people, read some studies, expanded my mind, and realized that wasn't necessarily what was going on. But at the time, I didn't have a lot of respect for it. And I remember that made me lose even more respect for it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I tried like a salve on my neck where I was like, oh, okay, there is something to this that's not just like people lighting up in their garage and like finding a workaround to do the thing they want to do. Yeah. But I still remember that appointment and thinking it was kind of funny because he wasn't even requiring like full yes or no answers from me by the end of it. He was accepting grunts as he like kind of poked at my neck and like moved my head around. I think you could use medical marijuana. And then like I didn't even use it for a long time. It took a friend taking me to like one of these little it was kind of an interesting workaround they'd made because you couldn't pay money for a THC product. If you were going to grow for other people, you had to be willing to donate it to each other. So what they did do is they set up this farmer's market and you could buy like all this junk shit that they went and got from the Dollar Tree. And it came with quote unquote free gifts depending on what you bought. So that was the workaround. They put a little bit of the salve on my neck because this was a friend that really struggled with like rheumatoid arthritis. She goes, no, you need to come. Like, there's some stuff and I think it could help you. Because I had a headache every day for over a decade at this point. Mm-hmm. And she took me and that was like the first time I had felt like some relief in my neck and head. And it was topical. Like, I didn't get high or loopy or anything like that. Like,
yeah, I don't know if this is true or not, but I did hear that somewhere in the United States there was a store you go in and you hire psychics, and the psychics will find your quote unquote lost weed. So you're paying a psychic, but you're leaving with weed.
Oh my god, that's really funny. So, anywho.
Let's go into our next con.
Con number 13. Gun control laws are racist. Current gun control laws are frequently aimed at inner-city poor black communities who are perceived as more dangerous than white gun owners. Charles Gallagher, M.A., Ph.D., the chair of sociology at LaSalle University, stated that some gun control laws are still founded on racial fears. Whites walking down Main Street with an AK-47 are defenders of American values. A black man doing the same thing is public enemy number one. In the late 1960s, gun control laws were enacted in reaction to the militant gun-carrying Black Panthers. Adam Winkler, M.A., J.D., UCLA constitutional law professor, stated, quote, "The KKK began as a gun control organization. Before the Civil War, blacks were never allowed to own guns. So after the Civil War, there was, quote, constant pressure among white racists to keep guns out of the hands of African Americans because they would rise up in revolt."
I wonder why.
In Virginia, in response to Nat Turner's rebellion, also called the Southampton Rebellion? Yeah. In which slaves killed 55 to 65 people in the most fatal slave uprising in the United States. In 1831, a law was passed that prohibited free black people to carry or keep any firelock of any kind, any military weapon, or any powder or lead, and all laws allowing free black people to possess firearms were repealed. Okay, this is... I don't even know how to respond to this one, because a lot of the people asking for common sense gun reform aren't reacting to shootings being done by Black or African American community or people of color. Like, a lot of these are being done by white dudes. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah. So it's funny to me because they're going back in history and pulling up examples from there, but not current ones.
It's disingenuous too, because it's kind of like the anti-abortion people that talk about Margaret Sanger starting Planned Parenthood as a eugenics organization or something like that, which is complete bullshit. And it's I have a hard time believing that like the NRA is like a hardcore civil rights organization in this particular country. It's like. Yes, it seems like anytime there's a fear of Black people or minorities in this country, getting upset over anything, then magically gun control laws will miraculously pass.
Well, and that's what's interesting, is I find this, I guess that's why I'm having a hard time responding to this con, is they're saying the existing gun control laws are racist, right? Or ones that have existed in the past, but we're talking about making more common sense ones that make more sense and would thereby include more white dudes, because let's be fair, that's what they're kind of like. They talked about a white man with an AK as defending America, right? Like, seen that way. Not anymore. I don't think so anymore. I think nowadays if you'd see some random white dude walking down the street with an AK, you're calling 911. Right? Like, I think that attitude has changed some, and we're asking for laws to reflect that and protect us against that. So I guess that's why I read this one. I was like, I don't know what to say, because I'm not going to reiterate it too much. Basically, this con is messing with my brain a little bit, because, like, yeah, I do agree that our current gun control laws aren't good. I don't know if I would have said that I believe they are racist. Sure, I mean, this makes a valid point to that, but it doesn't really take away the point that we should be making better ones, which is the conversation we're trying to have. Exactly.
I mean, because they even mentioned here too, like if in Texas you had a Black guy with an AR-15 on his back walk into a grocery store, people are going to be calling the cops. Yet a white guy does that and he's buying milk.
And I don't, like I said, I'm not sure that's really anymore, though. Like, nowadays, I do think you're more likely to get a call. I mean, granted, it depends on where you're at, right? Because, like, in certain more rural areas, open carrying on your hip, a little bit more likely to happen. Now, is that also going to be a smaller town that tends to be more racist and is more likely to call if they see a Black man open carrying on their hip? Possibly, but I don't think that there's a law that would punish him more if it's his right to open carry, right? Like, I don't know. Like I said, it's interesting because the con to me supports, well, yes, we should be making better laws that aren't racist, that actually focuses on the issues.
Indeed.
Which is, the mental health background, more being aligned towards aggressive mental health issues, not necessarily depression and stuff like that, although with the suicide conversation, it does make sense to take that into account as well, right? Like, can we be fair that we should also not just be protecting somebody from buying a gun to hurt other people, we should also maybe protect them from hurting themselves. And that even goes back to that societal cost, right? Because if somebody does end their own life in that way, they're not going to get a bill for it at the end of the day, and it's that cold, like, yep, of course we care about the money argument. That's not my favorite, but it's still there. It's still a point.
Indeed.
Pro 14.
Pro 14, let's dive into it. The Second Amendment was intended to protect the rights of militias to own guns, not the rights of individuals. Former Justice John Paul Stevens, J.D., in his dissenting opinion for District of Columbia et al. V. Heller, wrote, "The framers' single-minded focus in crafting the constitutional guarantee to keep and bear arms was on military use of firearms, which they viewed in the context of service in state militias, hence the inclusion of the phrase well-regulated militia. Michael Waldman, J.D., president of the Brennan Center for Justice at the New York University School of Law, stated there is nothing about an individual right to bear arms in the notes about the Second Amendment when it was being drafted, discussed, or ratified. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to rule in favor of the individual right 4 times between 1876 and 1939, and all law articles on the Second Amendment from 1888 to 1959 stated that an individual right was not guaranteed. And I in some way, I agree. For the most part, I agree. I do think, like in the 1700s, telling somebody that lived on a farm that they couldn't have a rifle, I don't think that was going to happen. I think, I think history showed that, there were people that used it for their own protection of the animals, or hunting,
coyotes,
or something like
wolves, those critters like that, the predators that can come after your livestock. Like, you do have a right to defend your livestock. And
I think too, I think the longer the country was a thing, the more technology started increasing at a rapid rate, and also too with the birth of cities, I think that is where you see the talks about individual rights and all that particular stuff too. So it's this country, this Constitution should always be it's an ever evolving document. It has to be, because we can't live on rules set up that were created in the 1700s, because there was no way for them to think that far ahead, that we're going to make this law that 300, 400, 500 years from now is still going to be absolutely perfect for everybody.
Right.
Bullshit.
They didn't have semi-automatic or automatic anything back then, and being able to load, like, this actually was an argument I got into online where I looked it up, as far as like how fast you could reload and shoot a gun that was created and made back in the time when the Constitution was written. Totally different thing than now, and you had to be well trained. Like, there was somebody who's like, oh, you could still load like an old musket like X number of times. I forget. I'm not going to try to pretend to remember the number. I just remember I looked it up because that was one of the pro, or I guess con, right? Like, the against gun control was like, oh, well, you could still do like this much damage and load this fast. It's like, yeah, but you had to be a really well trained individual. And if you did something wrong, you could get misfire and hurt yourself. So, so the whole thing is the documents needing to evolve with the time is extremely relevant when you consider what technology we have now in our guns. You know what I mean? Yeah,
I mean, nobody's going to be taking a musket today to a shopping mall and going on a shooting spree. I mean, they may get 1, maybe 2 shots off, but, the framers of the Constitution had no clue.
Yeah, the accuracy, even, like, technology and gun sights that more or less didn't always exist on old muskets, but you can look into like how guns have evolved since the 1700s. But
I think that does kind of tie into the con here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and granted, I feel like this is kind of a rewash of something we already talked about, but we'll go ahead and go into it. The Second Amendment was intended to protect gun ownership of all able-bodied men so that they could participate in the militia to keep the peace and defend the country if needed. According to the United States Code, a, quote, militia is composed of all, quote, able-bodied males at least 17 years of age, under 45 years of age who are or who have made a declaration of intention to become citizens of the United States, and of female citizens of the United States who are members of the National Guard. I guess you can be a member of a National Guard if you're a woman, but not a militia. Why do I have a feeling we have female militia members now? Anyway, sorry. Therefore, the militia mentioned in the Second Amendment would have been composed of almost all adult men, and in turn, that most adult men should not have their right to own firearms infringed. In a 1792 federal law required that every man eligible for militia service own a gun and ammunition suitable for military service, report for frequent inspection of their guns, register their gun ownership on public records. Daniel J. Schultz, lawyer, stated, quote, the framers of the Constitution and Bill of Rights understood that well-regulated militias, that is, armed citizens ready to form militias that would be well-trained, self-regulated, and disciplined, would pose no threat to their fellow citizens, but would indeed help to ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense. And that's interesting because Yeah, I don't know. This con kind of contradicts itself a little bit because it's saying that you should have the registering their gun on public record, frequent inspection of guns, which is a lot of people who are anti-common sense gun reform, they seem to fight those things. Mm-hmm. So this con feels a little awkward for being a con. And also, they're implying what somebody meant by well-regulated militia, right? Like, they're giving their own definition of saying, no, they would have meant anybody able-bodied to come in and be well-regulated. And I'm like, but it says a regulated militia, so why are we deciding what they meant by that when, by definition, well-regulated would mean the regulations are in place. You are doing those regulations in order to be in a militia. So to me, this would almost be worded slightly different. It would be used to say, you must provide paperwork that you are in a well-regulated militia group in order to own guns that are that of service level. Right? And this could even go into some of the AKs, the automatics, the semi-automatics, that would require you to be a part of a well-regulated militia, not to just be willing to be a part of one if something comes up.
And also, too, regulations in and of themselves are not bad things, and it seems like Team Red in this country, especially during the at the start of the Reagan years in the 80s, don't like regulations. They think that the private industry or private people should essentially be able to control their own destinies. When we see over and over again that you remove regulations on stuff, it leads to bad things there used to be a regulation in place that said that corporations can only own X amount of TV stations and they can't own like a whole bunch all at once. 96, 97, Clinton helped repeal that, and then now we got situations to where you have groups like Sinclair Broadcasting, which owns a number of local channels around the country, dictating what their news people can read on the air just because those regulations that were in place were gone. Regulations in and of themselves are not bad things. However, I do feel that, when it comes to any regulation, there should be, not yearly or anything like that, but regular review of those regulations to see if they are still needed, if they need to be modified, or, if, there's something else that could be done that could be better and more equitable for everybody.
Right. But it's just like, I just think it's funny. We know what they meant by well-regulated. I was like,
no,
I don't know. I have a feeling there were things that were quote-unquote well-regulated back then, and you still had to meet certain criteria or be regulated in order to participate. Some things I would almost look like is like regulations around... Gosh, I'm trying to remember when like the Food Administration actually became in. Like certain things suddenly were well regulated, like milk distribution, meat distribution.
20th century.
You want to talk about alcohol, right? Because that became regulated at one point.
What is that Upton Sinclair book, The Jungle? I believe the book The Jungle, he wrote that about the meat industry in the United States, and it was because of that book that the government finally took action in terms of regulating the meat industry, making sure that everything was sanitary and clean and the meat was in good condition and not putrid and rotting or anything like that.
Yeah, so well-regulated, yeah. I think that didn't mean what they're implying that would have been meant by the founders back then. I don't know.
Yeah.
That goes a little bit more deeper into the history in general rather than just this, which I didn't prepare for that one, guys. Sorry. So if anybody happens to know the feelings on what was being regulated at the time and wants to share it, please feel free. Otherwise, I don't know if I will end up looking into it since this is our last one that we're going to be doing on gun control.
Indeed. And speaking of that, let's dive into Pro 15 here. Civilians, including hunters, should not own military-grade firearms or firearm accessories. President Reagan and others did not think the AR-15 military rifle, also called M16s by the Air Force, should be owned by civilians, and when the AR-15 was included in the assault weapons ban of 1994, which expired on September 13th, 2004, the NRA supported the legislation. The Second Amendment was written at a time when the most common arms were long rifles that had to be reloaded after every shot. Civilians today have access to folding, detaching, or telescoping stocks that make the guns more easily concealed and carried. Silencers to muffle gunshot sounds, flash suppressors to fire in low light conditions without being blinded by the flash and to conceal the shooter's location, or grenade launcher attachments. Jonathan Lowy, director of Legal Action Project at the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence, stated, "These are weapons that will shred your venison before you eat it or go through the walls of your apartment when you're trying to defend yourself. They are made for mass killing, but not useful for law-abiding citizens." And I put a little note down there, and it was touched upon earlier, but in the 60s, Reagan actually, when he was governor of California, did enact an assault weapons ban because the Black Panthers were showing up on the steps of the Capitol in Sacramento with AR-15s.
Right.
Similar to what the Second Amendment people do now. They weren't shooting anybody, they weren't causing violence, but the mere fact that a black man with a gun with an AR-15 was there, Reagan was like, nope, banned.
Yeah. And I think that even goes into, like, some of the ones where they were saying, like, some of the bans were racist, right? Like,
yeah.
But, yeah.
And it's just... I don't know if I necessarily agree with this one right here because, it's like, I think the regulations that need to be put in place shouldn't necessarily be on the types of guns that are available, but on the people who should be qualified to get them compared to the people who should not be. Now, does that mean I think that when it comes to weapons, you should have the ability to buy any weapon you want up to and including a nuclear weapon? Of course not. Yeah. But, to your point, like the AR-15 used for, like gun shows.
Right.
So there are legitimate uses that are not, that are not about going out and killing as many people as possible that people buy this gun for, and those people should not be punished based on the bad actions of other people. What we should be talking about is making sure that we have laws in place nationwide that help keep those people that shouldn't be getting the weapons, those weapons.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of take this pro not necessarily as a standalone pro. It almost feels like it's a response to people who support the con of, yeah, but we need them for hunting. Mm-hmm. Well, you don't need this kind for hunting. Like the fact that it would tear through your venison.
Yeah.
Or you know what I mean? And that you don't need to conceal the flash, like, for hunting like this. So, I mean, granted, a lot of people on the super pro-reform, pro-control side, like, there is that far side of it that says we should never have them ever. And granted, like, that's something I would ultimately have to accept if that's the way that we went, if it meant keeping people in our country safe and reducing these gun deaths. I've said I really enjoy shooting the little AK. Like, it was really fun. But, like, is me having fun more important than keeping people from getting killed, like, at schools, at malls, at fucking New Year celebrations? No. I don't think that's actually more important than that. So, I mean, granted, it would even be a situation of like, well, they could try to ban it, but if it doesn't change anything, it's not like we haven't reversed decisions before.
Yeah.
Too soon, Roe v. Wade? Anyway, so, yeah, it's kind of, like I said, I took this more as like a response more than a standalone pro. And I think that's why it doesn't sit well as a pro. Because it's not a good standalone pro. It's just kind of a response.
Yeah, because, to your point, hunters are not stupid. They are going out to feed their family or maybe, other people in their tribe, family, friends, whatever.
Yeah.
You're not going to take an AK and shoot a deer and expect to have any good meat coming out of it.
Unless you're really good at headshots.
But, you want that one clean shot that's going to take the animal out quick to where the animal's not suffering. Right. And it's so including hunters in this bit, is kind of disingenuous too.
Right. So, yeah.
Right.
So our final con number 15, gun control efforts have proved ineffective. According to David Lampo, publications director of the Cato Institute, quote, "There is no correlation between waiting periods and murder or robberies. Banning high-capacity magazines will not necessarily deter crime because even small gun magazines can be changed in seconds. The, quote, gun show loophole, end quote, is virtually non-existent because commercial dealers who sell the majority of guns at shows and elsewhere are bound by strict federal laws. According to a March 10, 2016 Lancet study, most state-level gun control laws do not reduce firearm death rates, and of 25 state laws, 9 were associated with higher gun rates. So I think some of this goes along with some of the stuff that we've talked about when you've got neighboring states where there's a will, there's a way. I'm super curious on some of these studies, though, because it seems to go against some of the stuff we were reading about the kind of crime of passionness of it, which has been proven in other studies that have been linked in this same article. So,
well, I know the Cato Institute is a libertarian organization. They're like a think tank. So, they it's their job to come up with talking points for policy issues like this. But, when you state there is no correlation between waiting periods and murder or robbery rates, you're not addressing, what the governor of California talked about in terms of people being able to just hop, skip, and jump over one state and to be able to get all the weapons they want. Similar in Chicago and Indiana. If they're the real test, I guess, would be if there was some national rules in place that monitored this, and we don't have that. So you can't judge it because you'll have one place that has great laws on the books. If the state next door doesn't, that kind of messes with the numbers right there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we solved the gun control problem. We are heroes.
You're welcome. Not all heroes wear capes. Some of us are just nerds.
Indeed.
Just glasses.
No, seriously, we bring this up as more of a way to start conversation. When it comes to a topic like this especially, there's so much passion on both sides of the issue here. And, one thing that I don't want to do, and I know the Reverend agrees with me, is get to a point to where you don't get out of your comfort zone and hear what the other side is saying. I mean, because, last episode, there was a point to where I was actually agreeing with Ted Cruz on something.
Shocker, right?
And so, more than anything, if you're listening to this, we just encourage you to keep that conversation going. Do a deep dive. Don't study the stuff that is going to tell you what you already know, which means don't go to your usual places for information on this. Branch out. If you are pro-gun reform, find someone that's pro-Second Amendment that you trust and is reputable. That's the important thing. But search them out to hear their side of the story so you can possibly get a deeper understanding of why they believe what they do and possibly find that, maybe, hey, there's something I can change, Yeah,
exactly. It's like, I had this conversation. I don't feel like my opinion has been swayed too much. I still feel like there is no real need to ban things if we can actually do common sense gun reform, especially if the people who say, it's mental health would actually also invest the same effort into encouraging mental health access and mental health care as they do access to guns. Mm-hmm. Like if they would give that same level of passion, I would hear that a little bit more, because that I agree with. Right? It goes back into, sure, our mental health numbers don't look different, but is that because we're not finding them because of our culture? Yeah. Is it because we don't have access to get people with the more aggressive antisocial mental illnesses? We're not getting them the care and the diagnosis they need to even be caught if we did something like how other countries do, where they do background checks, and that includes mental health checks. Right? So, I mean, and I'm still kind of pro, if your argument is that we need to be ready to defend, well then fine. It needs to be a well-regulated militia. Mm-hmm. Show paperwork that you're in a well-regulated militia in order to get your AK or your AR, right? Like, these actually do kind of make sense to me, but it needs to be done better. And I think refusing to look at things and just allowing the same access for this repeat behavior to continue. Again, 2 shootings since we recorded last week. Like,
close to 20 people dead.
Right? It needs to stop.
Yeah.
Like, and not doing anything about it isn't doing a service to the citizens at this point.
And, like I mentioned on previous episodes, you're not going to be able to legislate all crime. You're not going to be able to legislate away all murder. So it's still theoretically possible that with the best gun control laws on the books on a federal level, that you will still have people that will end up going out and killing. But the point here is that there are things that are not in place that if they were, it would severely reduce the numbers of people that go south mentally when it comes to guns.
Like, can we try it? Instead of just saying it won't work, can we try? Can we try something better? Because, like the kind of unfortunate joke I got to make, it's not like things can't be reversed. Look at Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. Nobody saw that coming, that would actually be reversed, right? So just because something is made, like, can we just try it and see if it reduces it? Is it not worth trying it to stop another elementary school from having a shooting? Alone that, right? Because it goes back to, we seem to care a little bit more when it is a school shooting involving children.
But do
right?
we?
But do we? Right, yeah. Exactly. It kind of turns into those, but think of the children. It's like up there with some of the smoking ban stuff that I've brought up. Like how banning flavors is a very, think of the children because children like candy. Meanwhile, like, most kids that end up smoking cigarettes are smoking menthols because they're the easiest to cover up. And that's also the bulk of their sales, which is also getting tax revenue for the government. So, of course, they didn't ban menthol. They still haven't banned menthol.
And a number of, a number of the kids that, do take up smoking have parents that smoke at home as well. So they have easier access to be able to get that stuff as well. And when it comes to stuff like the cigarettes, instead of banning the flavored things, why don't they do like what Oregon does with liquor? Have a tobacco store, to where everything's there, and then the same thing you could do with a gun too, I guess.
They stopped selling them at CVS and shit. So, just to kind of make that, the analogy there is the tobacco sales, really. And yeah, it's like they could straighten it up a little bit, Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I'm still just down for, I wish our country on a national level would try something. But too much infighting, too much far left side, far right side, heel digging. They don't want to come together. And this just seems like an issue that I wish we would come together more on. Because I think if you talk to either far side and actually hear each other's concerns, we could kind of develop some kind of common sense reform to try, just to try.
Indeed. So we thank you all for listening. This is going to end the month of January for us, and I think we were planning on the month of February being about love.
A little bit romantic, guys. So I know we probably might even repost our toxic dating culture episode. I know there were some people who reached out and really appreciated that episode. So it would give us a week off during some interesting things going on. Who knows? I might have another crisis week. I really sincerely hope not. That was me knocking on whatever wood is maybe in this table. Yeah. But, it was a good topic, so I think it'd be worth it to bring it up again and maybe talking a little bit more about love, romance, NRE. So if there's any topics that you'd be interested in us nerding out about for February, feel free to message us either through the voicemail on Anchor or through our Facebook. I have my own Facebook page now, which is funny because I've been using it to comment more on things. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, your page views have gone up like 2,000%. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess that might be driving some traffic. Who knows? Because that was the intention there, was to hopefully getting people kind of back to our site, since my Reverend Tracy Facebook page is just straight talking about how, podcast co-host, things like that, and using that also in our group, just so it gives me a little bit of separation from my personal page, where I more just like post pictures to the friend levels of my kids and things like that. So feel free to reach out to us however you find us.
Indeed, and we will do our best to help make you podcast famous, and heck, if you are entertaining enough, we may even put you on the show.
Yeah, if there's something that you feel strongly about, or say, like, I don't know, we do have people out there who are professionals in fields. If it's something that you feel is romantically related that you would like to come on the show and be our friend that we talk out a topic with, let us know.
Indeed. So thank you once again for listening. Check out Tim's Tremendous Tapes every Thursday on Spotify exclusively, and each Saturday we'll have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Firing off one last time.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.